place with a view off of 8th Avenue. After we said I do.
Welcome to the New York Times podcast. Your paintings rule the world of music, news, and criticism. I'm your host, John Caramonica.
And the interstate was so loud. There was a lot it had to drown out.
Does it feel just to me like everybody in Nashville in the last 10 years got married and then divorced? Maybe got married so that they can get divorced, got married so they can get divorced so they can record an album that feels like a divorce album, even then to go on and do press and say it's not really a divorce album, even though low-key it's a divorce album. Anyway, it's starting to feel like that. It's been on my mind recently. It came front and center a few weeks ago, or I guess a couple months ago. There was a Kelsea Ballerini EP off cycle called Rolling Up the Welcome Mat, which is about the dissolution of her marriage, which I do think, to be fair, Kelsey's been pretty straightforward about. And it reminded me of some other records that have come out recently. There's a Carly Pearce record, 29, Kacey Musgraves album, and some older stuff. And I thought, let's talk a little bit about the long tradition of country music divorce albums, focused on these most recent ones, but also a little bit bigger picture. If we're talking country music, we're talking with Marissa Moss. Hey, Marissa.
Hello.
Marissa, as you know, has been on podcasts before, is the author of a book that came out last year, Her Country, How the Women of Country Music Became the Success They Were Never Supposed to Be. Before we get into the Kelsey record, let's talk a little bit about, in the context of the work that you were doing for your book, the relationship between female country performers and songwriters and marriage and divorce as subject matter. To what degree did that come up in your interviews and talking to female performers about what they were or were not encouraged to write about or felt comfortable writing about? To what degree was that coming up before the Carly record? Because I know you were working on this book for a while. To what degree was that kind of stuff coming up in your conversations with women in Nashville?
Thanks for having me on, by the way.
Of course.
To talk about such a juicy subject.
It is a kind of a juicy, it is kind of a juicy subject,
It
right?
is, yeah.
It, the more I was like reading, I was like, oh, right. Like everybody was married to everybody else. And they were all like, the hell with this. Like, we're going to make records about each other.
Yeah. And then they'll just swap and make new records. And
probably,
it'll just keep going.
No, we'll do this again in like 3 years, probably.
We'll make a date on the calendar to talk about it. But when people like to make fun of me for loving country music or writing about country music, the joke that they'll always make is like some version of it's only about divorce, dead dogs, and like your truck, which I guess is sort of fair sometimes. But the songs that women wrote about divorce or sort of tackling domesticity in different ways were the ones that were really inspiring to these women that we're talking about. Loretta Lynn's Rated X, Tammy Wynette's Divorce, Divorce, rather. And those were the songs that were sort of cutting edge, yet hits often, that really inspired these women to think about where they could kind of fit in country music and what they had agency to sing about and talk about. And in recent years, kind of before this period of records, these hadn't been, women were sort of encouraged to write safe songs. And sometimes safe meant it was about smashing your boyfriend's window with a baseball bat, if you're Carrie Underwood. And sometimes it was about something really super neutral, love song. But it's been really interesting watching this kind of resurgence of interest. I guess not really resurgence, but it is a really large amount of albums about similar topics in a condensed period of time.
And we do want to emphasize there's a difference between like the Carrie Underwood stuff you're talking about, which is like a kiss-off anthem.
Yeah.
Right? Kind of like, I'm fed up. I'm done. Obviously, there's no shortage of songs like that. But what I was struck by, and I think comes through in the kind of materiality of these albums that we're going to talk about, is the smallness and intimacy of the songwriting.
Yeah.
It's not being used. First of all, it's thematically coherent from album. Like when Carrie does a song like that, it's one song or two songs out of 10 or out of 15. It might be the single, but it is not the dominant theme of the album. These are themed albums. There's a smallness and a tightness to them. And I also think, definitely with Kelsey, and to a certain degree with Kacey, I think, that shift in perspective also either necessitated or allowed for a shift in the musical choices that are being made on these records. It's almost as if the liberation wasn't just limited to what's actually happening IRL in life or in the way that you can put words together in the songwriting and the lyrics, but also in terms of how you can present those songs and present them slightly differently than maybe you had presented them on your last go around.
And that played out differently across how these women navigated those topics, whether with Kacey, it was permission to be kind of just full on pop. And with Carly, it was a return to kind of more country, pure country. So it was interesting to see how they interpreted that playfulness and like freedom from the rules that they'd set for themselves before on these records.
And with Kelsey, I find like the textures on this record a little spacier, like a little bit more in touch with electronic music production, contemporary pop production. Kelsey is always kind of tilted that way. And I think, if anything, maybe that held her back in the early and mid parts of her career, where she wasn't so clearly like a quote unquote, and this is not me saying this is me embodying the character of a Nashville person, but like not the truest of country singers. Like kind of, there was always a little bit, she was always slightly to the left, but I feel like she, if anything, production wise, leaned into that more on this album. It was like, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to make a record that has these flourishes on it. It doesn't really matter because that's what sounds right for this subject matter. Can we talk a little bit about Kelsey's career and kind of what led up to this? So this is an EP, and again, it's off cycle, which shouldn't be as exciting or unusual as it is, but it is kind of exciting and unusual.
Especially Kelsey's voice and the way she uses her voice and her vocal delivery on this album. I think she sounds better than she's ever sounded. And that's been a really interesting thing about her too, is I don't know if anyone really understood sort of her full vocal capabilities when she first came on. I'm really terrible with timelines, but what was it, like maybe 5 years ago, she came out with the song called Dibs and Love You Like You Mean It. Is it Love You Like I Mean It? Love You Like You Mean It, right?
I'm going to look it up real fast just to make sure that we are Love Me Like You
Love
Mean
Me
It.
Like You. Okay.
There we are. And that was 2014.
No. Oh, ouch. Okay. That was a long time ago. But she, I think everyone assumed she was the one woman that was getting country airplay essentially at that time. She was the chosen one. And she had a little bit of that pop friendliness. She was, sort of got the cosign from Taylor Swift.
Back when that mattered. Forgive me. Just a slight aside. Back when that mattered.
It seemed like she was sort of playing it safe because I think she was getting this country airplay. Meanwhile, she's a really prolific songwriter. It was not really nearly getting the respect that she deserved for her actual songwriting capabilities. But hey, she's a woman in Nashville. We know that happens. Fast forward to now, in between then and now, married songwriter Morgan Evans, who's Australian and is also in the mainstream country space, and then divorced him. He was actually the one who put out a song first addressing their breakup.
Yes.
She's had a couple albums in between this time period, but that they got married, divorced, and now here we are with this EP. I love the tradition of country answer songs, so I get excited when that happens. I don't mean to be like, I'm getting entertainment out of your personal life falling apart, like at all. That's very sad, but I do enjoy a good country answer song. And this was kind of like a whole answer EP to his song. She had an album come out recently called Subject to Change, which I thought was really great.
But notably, not a terribly successful album compared to the other Kelsey records. Like, to me, the definitive Kelsey records before this EP are the first two albums.
Yeah.
The first time and unapologetically.
And she had another one called Kelsey, which came out in March 2020. So it really bad luck all across the board.
Very unfortunate.
A good record, like a really good record. I enjoyed that record, but terrible timing, just the worst.
I don't think Kelsea Ballerini's put out a bad album yet. I find them occasionally spotty, and I think sometimes trying to land that combination of as you were pointing out before, that specific thing that her voice does with kind of commercially viable songwriting and production doesn't always hit. But I always felt really, really strongly about those first two albums. But then I feel like the genre changed quite a bit over the last 3 to 5 years. And it didn't feel quite as central to what was happening in the genre. But this new EP feels not only statement of purposey for her and where she is in her life and career, but also really does underscore a way to like take back the narrative for how to make a commercially viable country splash right now.
Definitely. And I think it's some for best work. And it's sad to me that her last album hasn't done as commercial. I suppose that'll change now that her profile is rising, thankfully. But I thought that last record was great, subject to change. But this one, it's interesting because a lot of times these EPs will come out in country music and they end up being complete throwaways. So it can kind of go either way. Like you test the water with this EP and you realize that nobody cares. And then those songs disappear like they never existed. And so does the record deal usually, a lot of the times. But
oh, hey, yo.
Sorry. But this one, it was really interesting to see it make such a huge impact. I mean, it does have a juicy story. And Kelsey's really smart and savvy, and I'm sure she understands that.
We were listening to Penthouse at the top, which I think is my favorite song on this. What's a song that really sticks out to you on this EP?
I love Leave Me Again because it's so sparse. But I think I was thinking about I think it's the second song called Just Married. And there's some really interesting lines in that one to me that I think immediately stuck out to me the first time that I listened to it. And that it's a lot of her, and well, I know we'll talk about Kacey eventually too, kind of saying these really like kind of ownership moments over the marriage and like how the man behaved and how she kind of rolled into things being like, I bought the house. This was my money. And that's a little bit risky, I think, in country music to, sort of put a woman's power on the table so forcefully.
Let's listen to Just Married.
But I wasn't made for fixing a plate or keeping our problems buried. I wasn't strong enough to keep on with all of the weight that I carried.
Before we get to the other albums that we were going to talk about, what do you think that an album like this is doing for Kelsey big picture? Because like I said, I feel like I'm hearing not simply an emotional freedom, not simply a lyrical freedom, but I'm also hearing musical freedom on this record. And so for someone at her stage of career, 8-9 years in, had a real commercial peak and now is kind of like maybe lightly cooled off a tiny bit, what is this record likely to do for her moving forward? Because it does seem to be getting a lot of attention that the last two did not get. And I imagine that that's something that she's ready to leverage.
In some ways, and I have no idea if she intended this, she probably didn't, but kind of feels like a little bit of like a rolling up of the welcome mat from Nashville too. And I think a lot of women in Nashville in country music get to this fork in the road where they're like, I can keep going one way and I can keep trying to be accepted by Music Row and country radio forever. And I have to play this way and I have to go in this one road. Or I can turn the other way and I can do what I want and I can play and I can experiment musically. It might mean that I go more into the pop bucket, but that's okay. Or Americana or whatever it is. And it definitely feels like her taking that road. And I think of a song like Just Married we were talking about. I think about women in country music and like kind of the idea of domesticity a lot and how women are playing that role. And she dissects a lot of that in this song. She's like, I don't want to make you dinner, And that in some ways it feels like a little bit of a divorce from like what you're supposed to be doing in country music. At the same time, it's a actual divorce, and not to like build this other narrative that she didn't intend or doesn't exist. But it's hard not to think about maybe this album being that moment too, where she takes a little bit of a divorce from Nashville itself.
We can be cynical as we want to be about Nashville all day long, and we certainly both have over the years. But
Me?
Yeah, no, but I mean, right. But it's like, I feel like I come on podcast 2 to 3 times a year and I'm just like, these effing guys, like just, man, it is that. Like, let's not get it twisted. It is that. But also, there is like sometimes some latitude to move in a slightly different direction. And Kelsey seems like someone who is maybe in the rare position of having enough longevity, enough credibility, and enough history at radio to maybe be able to find some attention at radio for a song that doesn't sound like a quote unquote contemporary country hit. Possible. I don't have like the highest of hopes, but it's not out of the question, it seems.
And I would hope, I mean, I think that's where things get interesting in the same way that it's, you know, it's interesting that someone like Maren Morris can still maybe, hopefully, keep being embraced by country radio and go into the Americana and whatever other worlds with the Highwomen and be super outspoken. You hope that like country music can get its head around the idea of two things being true. It's usually not really good at that.
Yeah, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no.
Yeah, not usually the case. But Kelsey did just host the CMT Awards with Kane Brown, and that's a very country specific audience and thing. And she's not like completely dismissing Nashville at all. I think she still really respects and appreciates and sees herself within this framework, but sonically suggests something a little bit different.
This is an interesting point to pivot to talk about the Carly record. So Carly Pearce put out a record called 29. And this record, you know, if you're scrolling through Spotify, it's like 9 versions of this album. Really leaned in. You know, I do want to say maybe the lean in was like a tiny bit much, but there is a 7-song version of 29, which I guess maybe is an EP. I don't know what anybody was calling it at the time. Then there's 29 written in stone, which has all the extra songs. I don't know which one is technically the album. I guess just 29 was technically the album, but these things are meaningless. Let's listen to Next Girl.
Hey, next girl, you think that you know better? Maybe the last girl was just a little bitter and jaded. Yeah, there ain't no doubt. But if he ever talks about the ex-girl, she tried like hell. It was too late to save herself. So now she's just trying to help the next girl.
Marissa, you had mentioned a few minutes ago when we were talking about this divorce album idea as a opportunity for a musical transition or jumping off point. Carly's doing a different thing. She's doing that, but she's doing it differently than Kelsey is doing it, right?
Yeah, Carly had a successful debut record. Her single, Every Little Thing, was an actual radio success, which is rare for women, as we've discussed. And then she had another, I think, a self-titled record after that, which didn't really resonate.
There was that Lee Brice thing, the duet. That was kind of a thing, right? A radio hit?
Yeah, that was fine.
Yeah. Just as a sidebar, Lee Brice, I really loved Lee Brice in the early days. I don't know what happened. Kind of went left. I feel like Luke Combs came and took his husk away, and then it just never came back. Anyway, total sidebar.
She's always talked about, I mean, she got her start like playing at Dollywood, at Bluegrass. And she's always talked about like how she really loved bluegrass and traditional country music and, you know, looks up to Emmylou Harris. And you didn't really hear that on her second record, Carly Pearce. 29 for one or 29 written in stone, or as you said, whichever, was really exciting for one because it brought her to that more traditional country sounding music that I think people knew that she had in her and wanted to do. Which, as you said, is different from Kacey and Kelsey. You know, this brought her back to sort of this traditional country sound.
And the notion being like back to herself. I mean, you know, not to be too heavy-handed with all the metaphors here, but like if you're writing an album about shedding yourself of like an unfortunate association, right?
Yeah.
That functions on 2 levels, right? The unfortunate association is this ex of yours. And also the unfortunate association is 1 to 2 albums of music that may not be the music that you were desperate to be making, but felt like the music that you should be making or had to make.
If you put out a divorce album and you didn't have any artistic growth or sort of freedom that came along with it, it would feel weird. It's like, well, clearly, maybe you need to rethink this or like, you know, go see a marriage counselor or something because you're not like, something's not growing here. And that's what makes these albums work in part is that, just like you said, they're divorcing a person and they're also sort of doing light reinvention or return to a different sound. A side note to all this is that the sort of added layer that you get in country music. Obviously, people sing about divorce and other genres. In country music, you have this sort of other thing going on where you have the relationships between these artists. Carly was married to another mainstream country dude named Michael Ray. Similar category a little bit as Kelsey's husband. And these are all very sort of Instagram friendly relationships. That's a thing. I know you've talked about this. It happens in country music where you have the dadding and the momming and the relationship and the marriage all kind of part of everything that's going on. So that adds a whole extra fun layer to all of this business.
As a sidebar to that, if we could be cynical for a moment.
Sure.
Far be it from us to be cynical. But if we could be cynical for a moment, everybody we're talking about today, I think everybody is or was involved with a fellow performer at some point. Why? We think about Hollywood relationships, right? You think about like, oh, they're just together because they'll be paparazzi together. They're just together because their publicists put them together, blah, blah, blah. I'm not willing to go that far. But is there some cynical read on the fact that all of these performers found partners within this incredibly small space and this incredibly small town? Is it benign? Like, well, of course, this is a person who understands my experience, et cetera, et cetera. Or is there something like it feels like it's part of the country narrative to have a partner, to have, if you're a Blake, to have a Miranda, if you're a Miranda, to have a Blake? Is there something in the water of the industry that is telling these women and these men, hey, this is actually a career boost. This is actually a way to aggregate your fans with their fans, to have people invested in your narrative, to kind of ensure, and tabloid, I use this very loosely, but like celebrity coverage of you, not simply performer music coverage, but also lifestyle celebrity coverage. Is there something in the water that's telling these folks, this is who you should be turning to? This is the kind of relationship that you should be seeking out?
I don't want to play therapist. At least I try not to play therapist, but I wouldn't be surprised if, while that might not occur on like a very conscious level, that is happening at a, you know, a sort of subconscious place in your brain when you see, just like you said, that is sort of part of the formula. So maybe you're seeking it out. Maybe you're sticking with a relationship that doesn't feel right because everyone around you is telling you how great this is. It is so hard for women in Nashville to have commercial country success. Like, I don't really like blame anyone for doing what they got to do to like try to make it work.
But that's sort of what I'm getting at. Was like we can talk all day long about like, oh, okay, record labels say to female country performers, like, you've got to record this kind of song. You've got to work with these kinds of songwriters. You have to do production that feels like whatever the production of the moment is. Now that I'm thinking about this in a bigger picture way, it feels like there's something more sinister happening here, where it's like, not only do you have to record a certain kind of music, but you have to embody a certain kind of lifestyle in order to be considered viable as a female country performer. And that's how this feels when you look at these records and the stories they tell in aggregate.
I mean, it would be really interesting to ask Carly and Kelsey in particular, like what the people around them were saying when they got into these relationships, which, you know, probably happen organically. You're in the same rooms, you're dating, like they're going, like you said, going through the same thing. Like, if everyone around you saying like, oh, this is good, this works. And like how much of that they heard and that may have made them feel trapped in these relationships. In a sense, again, I am not a therapist and I do not know, but that would be something I would be really interested to hear.
It does begin to feel, especially if you're feeling precarious in a town like Nashville, where you're just like, I just don't know. There's not a lot of opportunity for women. There's not a lot of opportunity to get on the radio, not a lot of support at the label, et cetera, et cetera. Anything that feels like a lifeline or like a way to increase stability may start to feel subconsciously viable. It's hard not to wonder if some of that's at play psychologically in these unions. And some of what we're hearing on these records is like the awakening out of that time period in each of these individuals' lives of just like, you know what? all that, you know, like all that, the music that they're trying to make me make, the life that they're trying to have me be like advertising, like just the hell with it, you know?
Yeah.
It's hard not to wonder. I'd love to hear more about that from these folks.
I would too. I think they'd be up for talking about it too. To some degree, you feel like you have to have that to have gotten to this place of creative freedom and expression. And it is interesting that I think that Carly, now I'm getting a little bit petty, but Carly and Kelsey are such superior performers and writers and singers to their exes.
Way superior.
Who are,
like, yeah,
fine,
way superior.
But like, these are women in a different category that, all things considered, should not need all of that stuff.
I'm with you on that. I don't think that's petty. That's facts. That's factual.
Facts. Yeah.
Facts aren't petty. Are there songs on, or a particular song on 29 that really sticks out to you?
I really love Diamondback. I think that's on the full edition.
That's on the Written in Stone edition, which is the deluxe version.
Country music loves that play on words. And when you hear the song, the song is called Diamondback, but it's "You Won't Give My Diamond Back," which is very clever. Sometimes I feel like a lot of people have gone really overboard with these lately, and you're like, oh my God, like it's enough. But that one's really smart. There are a lot of really great songs. I think the duet with Ashley McBryde.
Well, let's listen to Diamondback, and then I want to come back to the Ashley McBryde. So here's Diamondback. This is on 29, Written in Stone. We will be back right after this.
Well, I guess I'll just burn that dress. All those fairy tales can go straight to hell. Don't need you no more with these 24 carats that I'm wearing. No, I don't care if you keep the house, keep the truck, go downtown, get too drunk.
We're back talking country divorce albums. Marissa Moss is here. You were just listening to Carly Pearce. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Ashley McBryde duet. It's called Never Wanted to Be That Girl. We'll listen to it in a minute. I couldn't hear that song and not think of one of my absolute favorite songs of all time, which is Does He Love You? Linda Davis, Reba. Very intense face-off between two people, two women. I don't know if you would say competing, but finding themselves entangled with the same man. This feels like the come down version of that. That song feels very defiant, very like push and pull, like nah, can't be you. What if it's not me? This feels like
Yeah.
So that didn't go right. Like that's like, damn, we're in a bad spot.
He helped me change a tire in the Citgo parking lot. He said we both could use a beer. And I said, hell, why not? What started out as one night turned to 6 months just like that. He never had a ring on, so I never thought.
It's nice to hear Ashley McBryde on a song like this. A little bit different from, I think, the usual Ashley McBryde records. Tell me about this duet in your mind.
It's surprising because it's obviously not putting the blame on themselves for being cheated on, but it does have this sort of interesting layer of like kinship between the two women as a layer that, that exists within the song. When they perform it, it almost feels like a little romantic. Like it's, I guess more friendship than romance. I'll try not to go like real left field here.
You're not trying to overread it.
Yeah, not trying to overread here. Rather than having you bitch, you stole my man kind of situation. Right. It's working a little bit of like a working together, Jolene and whoever else coming together to sing a duet.
Like an overlapping, overlapping of grievances.
Yeah, exactly.
With like a clear enemy. I mean, I think like when I think about Does He Love You, it's like, it's not painting the guy as the enemy weirdly, which he is. Yeah. He's the bad guy. He's the one who's causing all the problems. This song, much more modern, acknowledges the man is the enemy.
Yeah,
the person in the middle is the enemy.
Yeah, we're just like tied up in it together. And like, I hate that I became that person that was like going through his phone, but like I actually had a good reason to do that because he was clearly cheating on me. That was a really interesting spin on that kind of tradition to me. And right now, country has so many, for the past couple of years, it feels like male-female duets is like bread and butter hit songs everywhere. It feels like you just put all the names of like all of the, most popular women and then the sort of most popular men in two different buckets, and like you pick them out and you're like, okay, these two, this will work. This is two women. So that was really refreshing and different, especially because they pushed the song a lot. They were performing it, they were taking it to radio, and actually getting Ashley McBryde played on the radio, which was exciting for me because I love her.
Love Ashley McBryde.
All kinds of good things coming out of that.
Let's talk about Kacey.
Okay.
And I think also it's a good moment to talk about this Kacey record, which is, Starcrossed, which, has been out for a long time already, because Kacey's ex just put out, Rustin Kelly just put out an album of his own. If you read our feature on him by Milena, hi Milena, it insists it's not a divorce album. It's of course not a divorce album. It couldn't possibly be a divorce album. It's just an album about my divorce, but it's not a divorce album. It's not very, it's very, very fine line here. But to your point from a few minutes ago about Kelsey and Carly both being, frankly, better and more successful than their ex-husbands, this is a dynamic here. So a great moment to listen to Breadwinner by Kacey Musgraves.
He wants a breadwinner, he wants your dinner until he ain't hungry anymore. He wants your shimmer to make him feel bigger until he starts feeling insecure.
What do you hear in Kacey on this album that we don't hear on Golden Hour, et cetera, et cetera?
Just want to go on record saying that I love Kacey Musgraves and Rustin Kelly in equal measure in different categories. Fan of both.
Okay, forgive me. Then I can go out on a limb. Karen, hi Karen, loves the Rustin Kelly album. Like loves it. This is like a signature source of disagreement for Karen and I. Whenever the advance of this record came through, whenever that was, Karen was so into it, and I just absolutely was like, "It's not the wave. It's not wavy. This is not wavy. This record." But I support people wanting to support this album.
Yeah, long time Rustin fan here, and obviously, Kacey Musgraves on the cover of my book, so we know how I feel about this. But yeah, Breadwinner it's such an interesting song, especially if you have equal fandom. It's a tricky one because it's always a case of like, do you incorporate what they told journalists into your experience of listening to this music? Because on one hand, you have a very strong country music tradition of writing songs that are often fictional, that are just stories that you made up. And you can, I think Kacey even said to some degree, like Breadwinner is kind of like a made up song, but maybe sometimes she didn't say, I don't really know, but I sort of chose to see it a little bit as her playing with a more fictionalized idea of a divorce in that sense, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Seemed kind of barbed to me. Just whether it's fictional or not, I would not like to be the person who is perceived to be on the receiving end of that song.
That would be a bummer. It is a divorce album. She called it a tragedy. You can't not take those pieces and put them together, of course. I think about that album a lot, just kind of in general. It came out at a very weird time in our history also. I can't remember the exact date, but it was still kind of like a COVID-y record. I wish it came out now, not because of Rustin's album, but at the time, and a divorce is, I have not been through one myself, but feels like an extremely awful personal thing to go through, I'm sure. And so she referred to it as a personal tragedy, which I'm sure it feels like 100%. But at the time we were going through such a profound global tragedy that I think maybe there is a bit of a disconnect for people. But I bet it would be received maybe a little differently if it came out now and we were kind of past that really intense hump of COVID. I think it was too much to think about whether or not she meant it as a personal record or a more general record about divorce or tragedy or heartbreak. The idea of it being too personal and having to tolerate someone's extremely personal story in the context of a really horrible state of affairs around the globe and everyone's life feeling really awful and people losing people to COVID and just a global tragedy maybe made our appetites for personal tragedy different.
You want to talk about Blake and Miranda a little bit? This feels like 700 years old
Yeah.
at this point. But for those who don't remember, there was a time when the dominant power couple in Nashville was Blake Shelton and the current husband of Gwen Stefani, Blake Shelton and Miranda Lambert. And then they got divorced in the mid-2010s. They both put out albums that are basically divorce albums. Blake's is called If I'm Honest. No question mark there, but the question mark's implied, right? It's an implied question mark.
Yeah.
I just want to say. And Miranda put out The Weight of These Wings. I really liked early Blake. I find later Blake pretty fatiguing, but I really liked early Blake. I don't know how much variation is happening like album to album. You know, it's hard for me to be like, damn, this record, he really went in his feelings. Like, I don't know. You know, like there's a song, let's listen to She's Got Away with Words, which is like a funny song about your partner. You know, it's a funny song about a bad situation, I guess.
Lying, cheating, screwed. Yeah, all the words I thought I knew, they got a brand new meaning now. She put the her in hurt. She put the Y in try. She put the SOB in sober.
And what do you think about Miranda and the Miranda record? Is there a song off of that album that really sticks out to you?
Oh, gosh. I mean, there's so many on that record. Tin Man was on that record. Tin Man, I think, will go down as one of the greatest country songs of all time.
Let's listen to Tin Man. I haven't in a while. It's a good moment to listen to Tin Man.
Hey there, Mr. Tin Man. I'm glad we talked this out. You can take mine if you want it. It's in pieces now.
So here's an example of two very, very famous, if not true A-list at that moment, like right on the verge of true A-list. Like not quite Faith and Tim, but, you know, up there at that moment and ascendant. Having this disruptive marriage and divorce, this felt like an opportunity for Miranda to reorient her music a little bit and to reiterate what we've been saying about Carly and Kelsey, to not have to play the set of games that maybe were expected. Now, she was always pushing against that from the very beginning, but there was something about this album that felt like a turn, and also a turn towards intimacy that feels like it set her on a slightly different path moving forward. Blake, I don't know. Blake just gonna keep making Blake records. You know, it's like, I don't know, man.
I don't know. He's like an animatronic version of himself.
At this point, yeah. I just want to hear Old Red. That's all I want to hear. I'll pay $50 just to hear him sing Old Red, but like nothing, maybe Boys Around Here, but that's pretty much it.
It's very scary saying anything bad about Blake in public, because the Gwen Stefani stands are like really serious, but
Are
that's
they?
fine. Whatever. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, you know, I've had worse.
It's fine. Yeah. I was going to say, I've made peace with it at this point. It's interesting, too, that we keep talking about women putting out these divorce records and making these really profound shifts musically. And whereas like when men have sung about divorce, they like do absolutely nothing different in like any cases that I can really think of. I'm sure there are examples, but when mainstream men in country music sing about divorce, like they just keep doing them and like keep going on as normal. It does not need to bring in any big sort of sonic shift or approach. And I do think it's interesting. I was thinking about, before we got on the phone, I was thinking about the Jerry Reed song, She Got the Gold, I Got the Shaft. And like, just, it's great. But even to that, like permission to be like funny about divorce and then just like move on with your life.
And to not be defined. I mean, I think basically, I don't think it's an accident that we're talking about albums on this subject by women who are also at career, I don't want to say crossroads, that feels so heavy, but at a pivot point in their career. I don't think it's a coincidence that that's what we're talking about here. That's a through line. And we're not doing that with male singers, because male singers are not asked to engage in that way or expected to make their personal narrative central to their professional narrative.
I think part of the reason we don't really know or like think about male divorce albums is because we don't really care that much. I mean, we care, but like Nashville does not really care if so-and-so new white guy, what he's really singing about subject wise. It just is, does it match up with what's working on country radio at the time? Like sonically, maybe he's singing about being a nice husband or whatever it is, like that happens to be working. Like we don't really ask those things of men in the same way. And they don't wear, as Loretta's saying, they're not rated X. They don't have a scarlet letter. They're not asked ever to sort of account for what happened in their relationship. And they're surely never the ones that are given the blame. I mean, that is a thing that we have seen in not just country music, but in all public marriages. It almost always defaults to the woman.
Was there never a Jason Aldean divorce record? No, it's a serious question. Like I was trying to think of recent high-profile male country stars who've gone through divorce. And he, not recently, but maybe like 5-6 years ago, was there never an Aldean divorce record? I don't think there was.
No, and I mean, and he got divorced after he publicly was caught cheating on his ex-wife. And so if anyone should have to account for that marriage in public, it should be that dude, you know, like, but no, nobody cared. Nobody needed it. Like his next album was probably just the same. Like he's had a million. They all sound the same. Like I will happily speak not so fondly about Jason Aldean in public. I think I've been pretty steady in my convictions there. But yeah, he never had to account for what happened. Nobody asks him anymore, but people still ask Miranda about the Blake divorce that was now how long ago? Like 7 years, 8 years? Yeah, she probably does not think about that much in her personal life and yet is still having to account for it.
For the record, I would love to hear a Jason Aldean Why I Tanked My Marriage album. I'd love to hear it. I don't wish divorce on Luke Combs, but if Luke Combs ever gets divorced, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear male singers with that depth and texture of voice going into some real raw subject matter. I'd like to hear that.
If Jason Aldean wants to sing about getting divorced and then, maybe being into Q conspiracy theories in a country song.
It can miss me with that personally. But yeah, I feel.
But at least he's, feeling himself. So there are so many different divorces that women in country music have to make to be themselves and find themselves both personally and musically. And often that's obviously the divorce from their spouse. There's a divorce from the expectations and the pressures to play within this very specific box. There's a divorce from, the public perception of how things went down and whether or not they want to answer to that. There's so many different divorces and breakups that women are asked to reckon with. That really adds a whole other interesting layer to the fact that so many women are feeling free to play this all out in public and in artistic form. It's been welcome and interesting for me and yielded, for the most part, a lot of really good art. Not to say that I'm happy that their marriages ended. That sucks.
This is the thing that, as a fan and as a critic of music, it's like it's always this tug of war between really wish happiness for these individuals on a personal level, and for all people on a personal level. But damn, it do be hitting when things are going badly. So anyway, again, I do not wish divorce on any robustly voiced male singer. That said, should a robustly voiced male singer get divorced, I would extremely welcome an album of this nature.
It'd be really interesting.
Love to hear it.
Probably not going to happen, though. Probably just going to keep doing the same. That's what you do. Just keep doing the same,
Fingers crossed. What's a song from one of these records that we've talked about that we should hear going out?
How about We Should Be Friends?
Let's listen to it. Do you believe it, though? Do you think that there's true sentiment? Is there truth underneath that sentiment?
Well, the reason I picked that is because I don't think she thinks she should be friends with her ex. And I don't think any of these women think that based only on listening to these albums. But I did pick that song because I think that is a specific moment, and Vice sort of falls into that category too, where Miranda's like, I'm super messy. This is who I am. This is who I'm going to be from now on. And either you're with me or you're not. Sometimes I'm going to be a mess. And like, I'm going to like to drink, and I'm going to like to be a little wild. And this is where I'm going now. I have this really profound album, this really beautiful record, these really like intimate, sometimes confessional songs. But like, I am also sometimes a little bit of a mess, and you can come with me or you cannot.
That is our show. Listen to every podcast ever at nytimes.com/podcast. Get the t-shirt. We got white ones left, couple black ones and small, but we got white ones left at itsthepodcast.myshopify.com. Subscribe anywhere you get your audio content, Apple, Google, Stitcher, etc., etc. Get in the Discord, get in the Facebook group, tinyurl.com/podcast Discord/podcast Facebook. Email us at podcast@nytimes.com. We're also going to do a mailbag episode pretty soon, so maybe start putting those in. Probably going to do it in early May. So start putting in some questions. Our producer, as always, is Pedro Rosado from Headstepper Media. We will be back next week. Here's We Should Be Friends.
If your mind's as cluttered as your kitchen sink, if your heart's as empty as your diesel tank, if all your white t-shirts have stains, if you've got some guts and got some ink, well then, we should be friends.